when I get a number of people to reach out to me and say, hey, can my site be a data center site? And we'll go through a process. We actually have some tools that we use internally that can vet out pretty quickly the zoning. Is there any flooding issues, 100 or 500-year flood issues? Is there power nearby? And just seeing power nearby isn't a qualifier, it's a starting point. Natural gas is also another component that we're looking for here, and natural disasters is. And so how we vet that out is we'll use our software, and I might use my internal staff, my the professionals that can easily vet it out pretty quickly. Any one of us on our team can vet out sites pretty quickly, but then we'll have a go or no go depending on a bunch of criteria. Hey, it's Howie Berry from Avison Young, and you're watching the Data Center Go to Market podcast.
Hi, it's Joshua Feinberg, host of the Data Center Go to Market podcast, and I'm thrilled to be welcoming a very special guest. Joining me today is Howie Berry, who is the principal and data center specialist with Avison Young in Palo Alto, California, Northern California. Howie, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Joshua, thanks for having me. This is great.
Thrilled to have you. Thanks for joining me as well. So, Howie, how did you end up in this place where over the last 10 years or so, you've become really deeply niched as a specialist in the data center industry, especially in real estate?
Yeah, how'd I end up here? Great question. I've been practicing in the data center world for most of my career. Early on, after high school, I became a electrical contractor, and I started working in mostly commercial field, hospitals. I started in hospitals, and hospitals have data centers. And then I started later in my career, I continued that focus on data center real estate, and data center electrical business, and was focused there. And over 20 years ago, I was working on a project in San Francisco that I wanted to I move into commercial real estate. And when I did do that, I took a path of becoming a value add broker, but with a specialty in data centers. And there wasn't, at that time, over 20 years ago, there wasn't a lot of data center business going on in the Bay Area. But I did turn my focus on semiconductor business that was moving out of the Bay Area because they weren't manufacturing semiconductor anymore, and I was converting those sites into data center sites. So that's really where I started that focus, and my career started at Grubb & Ellis, and I was there for over 5 years. And then when Grubb & Ellis closed down and was acquired, I moved over to Colliers International for 10 years, and halfway through that term, I started and building the data center industry for Colliers International. And then just about 3 years ago, I moved over to Avison Young, and have been developing the data center platform here at AY with professionals from the data center industry.
That's super cool. Was there ever a time when you were working in commercial real estate outside of industrial, outside of data centers and semiconductors, or did you find data centers kind of right out of the gate?
No, yeah, it was a great question. I actually started on the value add side. I was identifying R&D properties in Silicon Valley that were old, outdated, needed to be improved, and going and buying them with my clients, and then improving the assets, leasing them. That would be a second transaction on the property, and then we would sell them as leased investments. And I like to say I started my career doing hat tricks, 3 transactions, any one property. And it was pretty successful for me to focus on that type of business. And coming from the construction side, I understand what it took and need and budgets for developing and improving R&D and office product. But I dabbled in and practiced the data center business, but it really wasn't until 2017, 18 that I fully immersed myself on data center practice.
So in that first 10, 15 years, you're in such a like hollowed earth holy location for where so much of technology globally starts. It's hard to come up with maybe another comparison, except maybe Northern Virginia. Are there any properties that you ever worked on that people would just be like, wow, that was iconic, it's got historical value, and transitioning over to another owner?
Yeah, great question. So Vishay Siliconics, right next to Great America Park in Santa Clara, off Montague Expressway and Highway 101. It was iconic sign that said Vishay Siliconics. It'd been there my whole life growing up in the Bay Area, and when they were shutting down the site, I presented to them that data center development would be the highest and best value for that site. And now EdgeCore is developing, I think, 750,000 square feet and 90 megawatts on this site. So now it's gone from an iconic semiconductor site to an iconic data center site right off the freeway off Highway 101.
Very full circle with a very large set of buildings that will be filled with semiconductors.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Right.
And switches and the servers and storage trays.
Yeah, it grew up.
Yeah. Interesting. It's super interesting. With that in mind, Howie, do you ever come across people that are super early on trying to figure out what they want to do with their careers, maybe teens in high school or something, that bump into asking you for advice, that you've heard you work in the data center related space? Maybe they seem a little more inclined towards working on client facing responsibilities. They don't see themselves becoming like a software developer or an engineer. You ever bump into anyone like that asking you for advice?
Yeah, so I get kids that ask about sales, right? And sales is personality, I meet kids that have really good personalities, can connect with people, and majority of the job is connecting with people and having conversations about what's going on in the industry. And I've run into quite a few people, and you could tell right away, like, this could be a really good broker in the industry. And I always say there's three traits to real estate. It's a finder, a minder, and a grinder. The guy that can find the sites, then you've got someone who can manage the transaction, and then the grinder is the close. You could be two, but you can never be all three. You can't be great at all three. So, usually I find a lot of finders and grinders, and the minders, it's a different personality where you can manage the transaction and keep it on track, and making sure that everything gets done during a sales transaction.
Yeah, it's an interesting awareness challenge, because I think as a teen, when most people are thinking of careers in data centers, they probably think of their friends that are really into tech, that build like web apps and mobile apps and coding. And when they think of real estate, they probably first inclination is to think of residential or maybe a little bit of commercial real estate. So this seems like a totally open field that needs just a big amount of awareness created to get to that next generation.
It's incestuous in that it's everybody's moving in from family members moving into commercial real estate. But I found, being the data center industry, it's better to find people because data centers are so technical. There's so much complex components to operating, to power, to PUE, and just teaching a broker that aspect without them actually having any hands-on practice has been difficult for me. And I found that, my team all has come from some form of the data center industry, and they're now doing sales, and because they have the background, they have the relationships. And so I think it's a lot easier path to get into technology, maybe for the young entrepreneurial guy that wants to work in the data center industry regarding commercial real estate. Go work in the data center industry, get a job at Digital, Equinix, one of those big firms, maybe doing IT, and understand how the data center works and get the relationships, because then moving into the business is going to be a lot easier.
Do you think for someone that's planning something that proactively, would they be better off pursuing a career in IT or like operations, or would they be better off pursuing a career in sales or account management?
Yeah, that could be either. I don't think one's better than than another. If you can get in and maybe doing site selection for digital or helping, vet out, is there power, or for the developer within digital. I think that could be a great starting point. And even IT is not a bad spot to start, because understanding how these data centers work is really important.
I know when I talk with a lot of sales leaders from colocation operators, they increasingly tell me that their sales hires that are thriving are increasingly really technical enough that they like have
Right.
home computer labs, and they're almost technical enough that they could have a nights and weekends side gig as like a fractional CTO for small companies. And I imagine over time, as people crave doing a lot more of their own homework, that being the expert really helps quite a bit. The challenge is what you do is so multidisciplinary. Like,
Right.
how do you get the reps?
You can almost be too technical sometimes in this job. That if on the sales side, being it's a personality or a relationship driven business, it being too technical might be hard to connect with some people in the industry. But then again, there's some people that you connect with that are really technical as well, and that communication works well for them. So there's always somebody so people connect in different ways, right? So I can't say one's better than the other, but I do see that sometimes being extremely technical can be challenging for some people on the sales side.
I'm curious too, like in terms of how you work internally, is there like a team that approaches these big properties who typically is involved in identifying a property with data center related potential?
Yeah, so we use, when I get a number of people to reach out to me and say, "Hey, can my site be a data center site?" And we'll go through a process. We actually have some tools that we use internally that can vet out pretty quickly the zoning. Is there any flooding issues, 100 or 500-year flood issues? Is there power nearby? And just seeing power nearby isn't a qualifier, it's a starting point. Natural gas is also another component that we're looking for here, and natural disasters and so how we vet that out is we'll use our software, and I might use my internal staff, my the professionals that can easily vet it out pretty quickly. Any one of us on our team can vet out sites pretty quickly, but then we'll have a go or no go depending on a bunch of criteria. If they're manufacturing bombs next door, well, I can see that a data center is not going to want to be next to a bomb manufacturing site, so that's pretty easy to eliminate. But if there are a lot of those factors, if we have power or maybe some power and we have to self-generate, it's a path we can take and we can start looking at. And then also we might, if we see a site that doesn't work for data centers, we'll pass it off to our industrial experts or office or whatever that product could possibly be, that development, and we'll potentially develop it into something else.
That's a really neat aspect of that also, is having colleagues that work outside of industrial, outside of data center, who can come across properties that could be a fit or could be repurposed from a data center that's being decommissioned.
Yeah, we get even manufacturing is really hot right now, and we're seeing that there's a lot of sites we're going up against manufacturing companies that are also looking at the site for the power, because semiconductor and smelting of aluminum. We just had a requirement the other day for a company that's looking for smelting and can use over a gigawatt of power. So we try to find the right fit for the site, and obviously data center being the highest and best use, but the biggest risk with the 10 million per megawatt to develop a data center. 100 megawatt data center costing you $1 billion is a big risk, and you might not want to be in a hurricane area when you build your $1 billion data center.
That brings up a really interesting issue as well. I'm in South Florida, about an hour north of Miami, and historically people have said, wait, you're building a data center in South Florida. Yet that hasn't completely slowed down development, and there's a really iconic one in downtown Miami. Like, do you run into those kinds of questions in Northern California? Are people talking to you about like seismic issues with placement for sites?
California's got other problems. It's not just seismic, but that rarely comes up. Seismic issues, more so. Can we get it developed? How expensive is the power in California? How long is it going to take us to get permits? The cost to develop. There's so many different other factors that come into play when you look at California, and natural disasters is down on the list. Silicon Valley. Santa Clara, Silicon Valley Power in Santa Clara was the second biggest market to Virginia for years. And then maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago, they started to say, hey, guys, we're out of power here and we're not going to get it until 2035. So, that market is literally just dried up. There's claims that there's potential data centers with PG&E in California, but I haven't seen many being developed yet. There's a couple here and there, but it's a tough environment to build in.
Are you talking with many developers right now that are late stage projects with alternative fuels, whether it's hydrogen or natural gas or small modular, anything like that?
Yeah, everybody's, most of the projects that we sell are looking for bridge power immediately. If our power is not getting delivered till 2027 from utility, everybody is looking at an alternative source of, call it temporary power, to bridge to that utility connection. So everybody looks at that. And then alternative power sources, if we had nuclear, I'm sure we'd be using it, but we're just transitioning from the dependent on the grid, and we're going to have to transition as we run out of power from the grid, the reliability of the grid, to those alternative power sources. Nuclear would be a great alternative, but we're leaning on a lot of natural gas turbine solutions right now.
Another factor that sometimes comes up when I talk with developers is the local community environment, with how receptive or the opposite of receptive they are. Do you run into any situations like they see in Northern Virginia where they're contending a lot of times with community activists and a more hostile reception to data center development? Or is the geographic area that you're in been so tech friendly over the decades, over generations, that it doesn't come up very often?
Yeah, in all the projects I've ever worked on, I've never come up against a community involvement where they're not wanting us to develop. We've built a lot of sites that are pretty rural, that are away from people. Those typically happen when you're downtown or close to homes and residential areas. I haven't personally had any projects that I've worked on that have come up against any issues there, but I think like a lot of these big hyperscaler companies are great at getting out there and getting community involvement first, like AWS or Microsoft, and building community centers, adding value to those communities. And I just read an article about the concerns about data centers and taking all the power and causing the increase of power rates for residential homes. And that is actually the opposite of what happens, because these large data centers come in and you're using power, that we're seeing utility rates drop. So interesting statistic. And it actually, not to mention the tax benefits that the community gets from a data center development.
The challenging part with all of this is, like, there really is no formal source of education that anyone has that's outside of this industry. There's a handful of colleges around the country that teach a little bit about data centers. I'm not aware of many or any high schools that really have integrated any kind of significant curriculum around this, aside from like normal IT classes. So like, how does an elected official, how do adults, how do community stakeholders even know what the questions they should be asking?
Yeah, there again, right? Nobody knows about data centers. It's a confusing topic for anybody starting to get involved in it. And it's like, where do we go? What do we talk about? It's power. Is it compute? Is it CPU, GPU? There's a lot of terms that can get confusing. And I think it's the data center industry just needs to get more community involvement, just from what we were talking about there. and or the local legislation, just to say, hey, this, show them what's going on and show them those jobs. And not to mention, those are going to be jobs that are available when AI starts replacing jobs. It's going to be the technical people working in the data center. And I hate to label it as a blue collar job, but it's more of a skilled labor position that I think is going to become more valuable in our society.
As knowledge workers become displaced more with agentic AI, the
Right.
rise of people that are
You
needed
said
to
it well.
physically build and maintain the facilities.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's plumbers, electricians, all the skilled labor is, which we don't have a lot of. And, you bring up just data center, working in data center operators, there's skilled, I started as an electrician. That's a skill that I'll tell you what, every one of my friends says, hey, could you come over? could you fix this? And I just, for me, I love doing that. It's fun when you have those skills and you know that, hey, I could put a light fixture in, I could put a switch in. And I think that we the knowledge, we pushed away from that skilled labor as a valuable job, and everybody has to have so much, like you said, knowledge, as a value. I'm really glad to see this going back the other way.
With that in mind, if you were to bump into a coworker that you hadn't seen in years, that maybe you worked with 10, 15 years ago, you bump into them at a conference or the airport or something, and you're catching up over breakfast and you sense that they're a little bit burned out and they're looking for some guidance to get back on track with their career, what kind of insights would you be able to offer them about opportunities that are similar to either what you're doing or adjacent that they may have no idea even exist?
Coworkers from the data center industry?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's a great question, because I'm loving what I'm doing, and every day that's something new. It's just keeping track and managing that is a little overwhelming. But just being able to see these new projects, and for me personally, I love doing that. And so, advising somebody to where do you go, what do you do, how do you enjoy it? It's so personable, right? It's like, what's somebody gonna like? But I think in the data center industry, and if they're focused in that, I would definitely say switch jobs, go somewhere new, learn, something that where you're being challenged, and it's something that you have to work at to get ahead. And I think anytime you start something new, it's overwhelming, but it's also exciting because you're doing something different. And I think we can be bored by doing the same thing over and over again. I benefit from seeing something new every day.
Have you come across any friends, family members, neighbors in your community where they may have been displaced in the last couple of years over layoffs from big SaaS companies or venture-backed companies, and that have thought successfully about moving into the data center space? A lot of times I see on the sales and marketing side where people struggle and they leave, and they traditionally have gone to SaaS, or in some cases they've gone to real estate and some other fields. But have you seen anyone where the last couple of years of layoffs have led to people entering digital infrastructure or data centers?
I haven't seen anybody entering it. And I have seen some layoffs, particularly channels, guys working channels and leasing. Maybe the data centers are full and they need to move on to something else, or they're laid off because there's no properties to lease at this time. So I really haven't seen that. And I'm in Silicon Valley, so everybody gets laid off and groups get moved around, and everybody gets a raise by changing jobs in Silicon Valley. So being in the tech hub of the world here, you might go from Apple to Google and I could talk to any one of my neighbors right now. It's like he's at Apple, but next week he's at Google. And I see that quite often of where I live. But in the data center industry, I don't see, you see guys popping around to different positions all the time.
I see that often where people go to a conference and the following day they're announcing that they're going to another company, and you wonder, like, was the employer there looking for talent? Was the person going specifically to the conference looking for the next move? But yeah, there seems to be a lot of.
I get job offers, Joshua. I get job offers all the time, and everybody on my team does too, by groups that are saying, hey, we're looking for somebody who could do site selection, or site assessment, and we get job offers all the time. There are available jobs for skilled people in this industry, and if you know it, there's huge opportunities.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
Howie, when you think about your local area, the region, or just even nationally, what do you think is the biggest challenge or problem that people are up against when they're thinking about data center real estate? And what have you found to be especially helpful insights to share with them on how they can navigate that challenge?
So maybe a little bit more clarification on your question, so that it's just here locally, or because I work on a national basis, but
I think thinking of the U.S. market as a whole, among all the major and secondary markets for data centers, what do you see as the biggest problem that people are up against, aside from most people are talking about power? Are there other issues besides that?
Power.
That's power, it. More
Power. Where's the power? How are we getting the power? And it's funny because we used to transact on will serve letters. And I think the data center industry has been bit too many times that they say, no, we're not even looking or offering until we have a load ramp schedule. There's so many groups applying for power with utility companies, and it's in the gigawatts in what they're requesting, that, it's hard for utility companies to determine what's real or what's not real. And utility companies need to see off takers that, they're gonna, for this large investment that not only the data center is going to make, but the utility company is going to make, that they're actually going to be there for a while and pay for those utilities so that they can make back their money of what they invested. So, power is the leading challenge in the industry for sure. Then there's air permitting with generators, right? That's another issue, because if you're going to build a gigawatt site, I just looked it up. We had a 2.3 gigawatt request on a site, and I was looking up how many I need 2,100 generators for 2.3 gigawatts. I'm like, who's putting an application in for 2,100 generators on site? You become a utility company at that point, But so those are just some of the things we're running into lately.
That's a career path, right? How many techs and engineers do you need to maintain a campus of 2,100 generators?
2,100. Yeah. I was just like, how is this even possible? I think our biggest campus is Microsoft campus, and we're 500 megawatts. And we're scaling gigawatts. Maybe Caruso gets to that at a certain point, but it's really interesting that, even though we have gigawatt requirements all over the country, that we don't have a gigawatt data center campus actually operating.
So this right now is aspirational more than reality. So is that one of the struggles that utility companies go through, is they really can't see examples of this being up and running anywhere right now?
I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see it, but to that point, let's just even say we're half of that 2.3 gigawatts, and we still need 1,100 generators on a site. Typically we might see 100, couple hundred or at the most on a site. So it's I don't know. I'm not sure how we're going to get around that as backup power. So again, come on to small modular nuclear. We can use it as a power source, and most likely we can use it as a backup power source. So we're redefining the way data centers are going to be built.
So this campus with 2,100 generators, this would be for backup as opposed to primary, right? Because I've seen
All backup. It's all backup. Yeah.
I saw something a couple of weeks ago. Someone was talking about building a campus where the diesel would be primary, and they were looking at something else as the backup. I'm thinking maybe it was natural gas or
has to be,
or fuel cells.
Yeah. Well, fuel cells, even when you run fuel cells, they can't be scaled up and down like a generator, right? You can't just turn them off, turn them on as needed. You have to be running, or you have a load ramp time to get those fuel cells up and running. So like Bloom, right? But the generators they give you a lot more flexibility to turn on, turn off. And there could be generators that are natural gas powered as well, or hydrogen.
Yeah, I spoke to some guys down in Texas a couple months ago that were looking to take their turbine expertise in oil and fracking and set up a business of attaching the natural gas lines through turbines to generators as a way, like what you were talking about a few minutes ago, as a stopgap measure where they can have someone up and running in 6-9 months or so, and they use that for a couple of years until they can actually get utility power.
Yeah, we're seeing that, and that gets you around permitting and getting air quality permitting when you use temp power, or as long as you have a path to power of that, you can use generators to get up and going. And I'm seeing other companies that are worried about outages from the grid. And during the hot summer months, they're actually running off generators, like you were saying. And maybe that was their applications, where they come in on manufacturing sites. They're like, we're gonna turn off the grid. We're gonna go straight to just running our own generators to keep our plant up and running.
So in these scenarios where they're running potentially the generator as primary, the cost difference has got to be huge, right?
I would have.
So they're willing to pay an enormous premium for a couple of years because the time of going live a couple of years sooner rather than later.
I would assume that an outage, or maybe not being able to produce whatever they're doing, would cost more than what they're having to pay to operate and keep their generators up and running. But it's got to be expensive. I think there's countries that run on diesel generators, right?
Yeah, there's been a lot of disruption to utility grid in Ukraine the last couple of years. I spoke with someone last year whose company was doing battery storage specifically for cities in Ukraine that were impacted by the war.
Oh, they were? Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
There's all different kinds of applications for solid. I actually hear a lot more people talking about battery storage in Europe in general than in the US right now.
Interesting. Well, we're going to need a lot of batteries for this GPU deployment, because as I understand it can it can affect the grid and destabilize it when they run their programs on these minimal spikes. I guess these turbines don't like the way that that they can get spike power. So filtering it with batteries is the way to accomplish not having a destabilization of the power grid.
Thinking maybe it looks something, you'd have to ask an engineer, but it's like that sine wave stuff where you see the circle going above and below the line.
Well, that's it, right? And that's what happened in Spain and their power outage. And they at that particular point where they had a destabilization in the grid from maybe a substation that blew up, or a transformer, and they're at 50 hertz where we run at 60 hertz. The frequency was destabilized, and there's no way to balance that from batteries or solar, because they can't ramp up the power to put it back into frequency. And that's typically done by turbine or natural energy production.
So with these kind of demands, there's going to be a lot of figuring out new playbooks with national policy on how to do this. And the challenge too is, like, in the US, there's so more utility companies than other countries. This
is going so fast that it's only they're not going to fix something until a problem happens. They're going to go, wait a second, now we better address this, right? Look at like Spain, like, okay, we better not do that again. And they learn from that. Hopefully we learn from that. but yeah, this Joshua, this market and where we're going with the data center industry is just amazing to see this kind of growth in our lifetime.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Yeah.
Howie, when you think about your daily routine, what you spend your time on each week, each month, how do you envision that your routines where you spend time with clients might change over the next 2, 3, 4 years?
Wow. I hope I get more efficient because it's. I was just talking to my team about, being able to track the amount of incoming and determining if it's good, bad, or not at all. At some point, there's only so much land with power that we can get from utilities. So I would imagine we're going to slow down a little bit in 3 years, maybe. But when we talk about the data center industry being in the US, let's call it 40 gigawatts of utility or power, and that we need, or critical load, and we need to add another 90, that's a long way to go. And so I hope that and I do embrace the AI tools. I love them. They make a person like myself that much stronger in things that I'm not great at. And so I think that those tools are going to get easier, and I think hopefully it makes the time that we have during the day, if we can give back to taking care of ourselves.
That's a fascinating real question, as well as so much of what's powering the growth in what you do is AI related and supercomputing and high performance computing from just a purely productivity standpoint of specializing in data center real estate. Do you have favorite tools, favorite apps that you use on a regular basis that if someone from IT or your finance department was coming over and saying, Howie, we got to cut and standardize a little bit, like what would you fight hard to hold on to?
What am I allowed to use, or what do I use? Chat GPT is my go-to, and for everything, and so it solves so many it does so many things. It just keeps getting better. And then as I use it, it knows things about me that it said, even the other day, it said, hey, maybe you should give this task to your assistant, Alex. Like, okay, thank you, Chat GPT. That made it a lot easier, and then it laid out everything I needed to do. Even the fact that if you're running, say you're not proficient in Quicken, and you're like, how do I do this in Quicken? You just say, how do I do this? And it gives you an immediate instruction, like do this, this, and this. That is so much easier than the help button on whatever tool you're using on a program. ChatGPT is definitely my go-to.
Yeah, so many people have been saying we're nearing the end of the era of the 10 blue links, where you had to do the search, try to look at the domain and see which was the most trustworthy, most likely to solve it, click through and like, that one's not so good, back button. Number 2 is not so great either. But I picked up a little tip and then before you know it, you're 20, 30 minutes down the rabbit hole where now you get the best answer.
Yeah. Think of this. Think of how we've changed from, let's call it 2019. Okay. And then we had COVID, and COVID happened. It was like, now we're doing this Zoom and meetings, and we're talking to each other virtually all day long, where we used to actually have to call someone, have a meeting, and we barely used video conferencing. And now with AI coming in as a tool, and like you just said, searching on Google, and you're like, no, that one's sponsored. Why am I looking at that? And we're proficient in Google searches. Now we're just I've got the answer. So are we going to become lazier? Are we going to become where we're just like, are we get mad because we didn't have the answer right away? We didn't have to work for it.
IT support has been another interesting battleground to watch with these tools. Like 10, 15 years ago, one of the things that really irked IT users, whether it was B2C or B2B, was having to call for overseas support if they felt there wasn't empathy or language or communication, what have you. So companies bragged about having US-based support. Then maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, you started to see companies using their live chat and using a lot more automation in there. And they talked about like the idea of support ticket deflection, essentially meaning that they were able to get out of having to have a human touch a support ticket. Now it seems that instead of what I found in the last 6 months to a year is that automated tools that are solving the support are so good. You almost hardly ever need to raise your hand and say, where's the human?
No, that's so funny you said that, because I had IT on today for the second day in a row to add a program on to my Microsoft Teams, and they couldn't figure it out again. And I'm like, and they got to come back again tomorrow to talk to somebody first. Can we do this? I'm like, this is a process. Just add one application to my Microsoft Teams. Why are we not? Why am I just not have it and it works and I'm done? I'm moving on. I guess I'm getting impatient. Just what I was saying.
The kind of wake-up call for a lot of the industry, as well as if these tools are working well enough on the services side, at least on popular SaaS applications that have a lot of data to train on, the next step is you start to see some of the entry-level, low-cost, commoditized sales questions being addressed like that as well. I saw a couple of months ago a big data center operator laid off their entire bare metal sales team because they decided,
Wow.
I guess, the unit economics were either they didn't want to be in that business, or if they were going to be in that business, it needed to be self-service sign-up, self-onboarding, and look a lot more like e-commerce than having traditional sales folks doing it. So a lot of what I spend time talking with people on is strategy of how they can make sure that the account executives and sales development reps that are staying on are upskilling enough that they can add a lot more value to client conversations than the bots can, than self-service can.
Again, it's back to relationship, right? And dealing with a person that you can at least feel like, okay, AI is nice. It's never not polite, but when you're dealing with somebody and you're like, you want to get right directly to a person, there's something about that I think we'll still need. Yeah, I wonder how that company's gonna be after just self-service, add you to the platform type layout that you were talking about. I only can imagine, because as a human, you can vet out, is this valuable or not? Is this something we should be working for or not? I could see a lot of problems there on a self-service and eliminating people.
Yeah, it's interesting where you feel like some of the knowledge workers are the most vulnerable, and nobody would have predicted that 5 years ago. There definitely is a sense of like really complex transactions, complex, like the kind of projects you work on would be something where there will need to be human help for a really, really long time to come. But there definitely will be pockets of things that are extremely straightforward, that are especially low cost, where they just look at like what the cost of the labor is and look at the cost of building the tools to do it. And a lot of these are generational changes too.
Yeah, I had, it was about 2018, a friend of mine come to me and he says, what do you think about creating a product an AI product that replaced brokers? I went, well, of course, no, that's my job. Like, I don't want you doing that. But I just think that the personal touch, we just can't get away from. And I don't think an AI is gonna, I don't know, maybe someday it will. I'm scared for the future in that respect, if they replace us.
I don't know, it's hard to, like, what you do is so complicated. It's hard to see that you could train on enough data that all of a sudden the software is making decisions on these 8-9 figure real estate investments.
But if it watched me, it could learn. Right. Yeah. And say, I saw how you reacted to this situation. Now I can mimic that. And isn't that how we learn? Basically, we learn from watching other people do things, or experiences that work or don't work, that we're like, okay, never do that again. Or, you know what, this actually worked for me, I'm going to use that in this situation. I can see what's that generative AI, once we get there, if that happens, where it becomes us, that maybe it teaches itself even quicker from experiences, because we have, our limiting factor is memory.
What do they call it? The token window gets wider and wider. So remember, it's like what you were talking about with your assistant, Alex. And
yeah,
does it get smart enough that in 6 months it says, wait a second, how you're going to dump this big project on Alex? Don't forget it's his birthday tomorrow.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
That's where we'll be. Like, will we stop making decisions and we're relying on someone else to make a decision of things that it knows what we'll like or do? Yeah, I don't know. That's what I mean. This is a real big, Joshua, unknown of where we're going with this. And I kid when people go, "What do you do for a living?" And I say, "Well, I'm destroying the world one data center at a time." We're AI. Here we go. I don't know what's going to happen here.
That's been an interesting change too the last 3, 4, 5 years, is now data centers are in mainstream business and financial news so often that you actually do get a lot of people that work outside of IT that know kind of sort of, they've heard of, for sure have heard of NVIDIA and OpenAI at this point.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great point, right? Investments in data centers, and how do you invest and how do you underwrite a data center with all of the components that go into building it, and how long do they last, and does that data center become obsolete? Because when technology changes, look at data centers now. Look at the historic data center that we've built for years, and you all of a sudden you want to deploy GPUs, and you're going from a 10 kW rack now up to 50 or 130 is the request I'm seeing more often per rack. You have to reconfigure that data center in a way that now you take the power distribution, the PDUs, where they feed each rack, and they're only deploying 10 kW a rack. Now you're pushing all of those PDUs into a corner, and you're having more intense power in a smaller space. So your 100,000 square foot building, you're only utilizing less than half of what you would have had to use to operate the older data center. So it's changing so rapidly that, and going back to the investment comment, is that to underwrite it and say, hey, look, I'm going to get 20% returns on this investment for the next 10 years. But then when you get to year 15, what's my CapEx I'm going to need to spend to bring that data center up to the current configuration or deployment? Could be huge. Or maybe scrap it. Maybe it's garbage. I don't know.
That use case with reconfiguring, where you end up with thousands of square feet that are now being underutilized, does that play back into what you're talking about before with three deals on the same property? Someone comes back to you and says, wait a second, we have 5,000, 10,000 square feet. It's too much for us to use. What do we do with it?
What do you do with a half-vacant data center? Yeah. Nothing, because nobody wants anybody else in the building. Yeah. It's a mission critical facility with a fence around it that literally it's only the people that operate the data center. And so that space becomes, call it ghost space in the industry, because you're not going to fill that unless you go out and you go get more power or figure out a way to utilize additional power in that vacant space to sell rack space.
Yeah, I mean, there's only so much lemonade you can make with that.
Yeah.
Bigger offices for everyone, more classrooms for internal training, or
yeah, nobody wants to go to an office. Those are hard to even lease now. And it's funny. I was just looking at a site today. We were talking with a client, and there's an older historic brick building on the property, and we were saying, like, what do you do with that? And I'm like, make it into maker space or incubator space that you could. It's right next to a data center, and then maybe it's technology incubator space or maker, where you're say you have self-generators on site that are capturing carbon, and then now you take that carbon and you create beer. Because I've seen that on sites where the guy's self-generating and he's selling his captured carbon to the beer manufacturer next door.
I wonder why nobody's taken the lead on going all in on training and education at these physical facilities. I mean, at some point it's saturated and have too much capacity, but I don't see many people. There's 3, 4, 5 companies globally that control most of the market share on data center related training. Traditional K-12 doesn't touch it. Higher ed barely touches it. And yet there's all these unfilled jobs. And the challenge with all of it is the traditional training people think of, like, okay, we're going to teach the IT side. How do you teach people about HVAC, plumbing? How do you teach people about the construction?
they would have to either want to or be related to somebody that's in those industries that gets them, again, like how incestuous. My father-in-law got me into commercial real estate, is how I ended up in commercial real estate. But my dad was electrician, my grandfather was electrician. That's how I got into electrical. So, again, that's how typically you get into those trades. But unless you really wanted to do it and you go to a union who has skilled labor training and you work through a whole union process, then that's really the way that it happens now.
More like apprentices.
Yeah.
Super interesting. Howie,
Yeah.
I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me about so many facets of your career, how it's evolved, where you see the biggest challenges in the space, what's going on in the field with selecting the best use of these properties and how they get valued, and what you do with them when all of a sudden the density isn't what it needs to be.
Well, you have to be ADD in my job. So I've mastered that. And so you got to be everywhere covering all different yeah, I appreciate that.
Howie, if someone wants to follow what you're working on or reach out to you, is LinkedIn the best place? Email as well.
LinkedIn's great. I put my email here. And if anybody wants to reach out and have questions, I do quite a bit, and sorry to mention this before, but I get a lot of people in college that reach out and ask about the data center industry. So I do, and I'm always willing to guide or help or tell them where to go. And if that's you, please reach out. I'm happy to advise and say, hey, this is a good move or not a good move, for my opinion, getting in the data center industry. So always willing to share, because I believe it comes back.
And what's the best way for someone to learn a little bit more about Avison Young, AY, to learn about your firm?
AvisonYoung.com.
Okay.
Happy to just look it up, and then we're happy to, we do market reports too. And if you want to get our market report on data centers that we put out quarterly, we're happy to share that with you too.
Well, we'll put links to those in the show notes and the blog post, so viewers, listeners can get access to that as well. But Howie, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today. It's been super insightful. I've been speaking with Howie Berry, who's the principal and data center specialist of Avison Young in Palo Alto, California. Thanks so much, Howie.
Thank you, Joshua.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.